can everyone see? Dave, I'm just going to start. Wait, slides? It's me. Hi everyone, good evening. I'm going to start us off on running technique. I think that's it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why running technique is so important to us runners, and then we're going to move on to some flaws that I see frequently as a running coach, and then I'm going to give you some ideas and suggestions on how to address those flaws if they are relevant to you. Okay, so I'm going to whiz through these if that's alright, because we're going to touch on these a lot more throughout the presentation. So why is running technique so important to us runners? Injury prevention, to start off with. Alice is going to talk much more about that. Then we've got running economy, efficiency. Alice is going to help out there by talking loads about that. Enjoyment, and then speed, which is what I'm going to touch on a lot this evening. So, if we can go first off, we're going to start off with some common flaws that I see. So, the overstride. The overstride is probably, I'd say, the most common technical flaw that I see with regards to technique. Now, as you can, well, you can't see so much because it's slowed down, but the cadence, the speed at which you tick over, is very slow here. Okay. So what's happening is my feet are landing and loading far out in front of my body, yeah, which is exactly what we don't want. We want to land plumb underneath, if not slightly in front of our centre of mass. So what's happening is there's three main issues here for me. Firstly, it may sound ridiculous, but the stride length being long actually means that we run slower. Because what happens is, the stride length, we land here, load here, and what happens is everything has to come over the foot, the hip to follow, before we can get into what's called terminal stance and push off again. So I'm landing here, and it's taking me an age, so to speak. It's actually only a split second, but an age to come through and then push off again. Okay? Now this doesn't equate to much on a single stride, we're talking split seconds. But if you add that up into 5k, 10k, half marathon, full marathon, then we're talking about tens of seconds, if not minutes, because that body's got to come over the foot. So ideally you want to be landing underneath, which I will mention several times as we go through. The second thing is, it's speed related again, and that is momentum force and braking force. Every time we land out here, our force is heading a little bit, because if you can imagine a shovel going into the floor, our force is going a little bit backwards, yeah, when really we want to land underneath and everything shooting that way. So essentially, every time you land way out in front of your body, you're putting the brakes on. Okay, so bang, everything shifts back that way, when really we want to be boom and heading off in that direction. Okay, this is good, this Luke. And thirdly, the other issue here, I mean there's several, but the three for tonight, injury. Now if I'm landing underneath my hips here, then I've got muscles and joints to decelerate the movement, okay, above and below the joints, so the knees supported with the hips and the ankle below. If I'm landing way out in front of my body with a locked out knee, which I see so much of, then everything is crashing through that knee, ankle, hip, and that, as Alice will testify, will lead to, well, not inevitable, but quite likely that you'll get an injury, because all that force is going through unsupported joints. Okay, so the overstride is the biggie, and the one main thing to rectify that is your cadence, the speed that you tick over. You do not want to be doing slow, overstriding, slow paces. You want to be looking at short, fast strides so that you land underneath your body. Won't be plumb underneath, no one really does that, but slightly out in front is great. That is not great. You do not want to be landing there. Sorry, rant over. So, the next one. The next flaw. Now this is overlean. Pretty common. I don't know if you've probably all heard of people talking about leaning from the hips, yeah, which I'll need the stick here. Leaning from the ankles, yeah? You've probably along the way heard about that, and that's absolutely fine if you're leaning nicely forwards from the ankles. If you're leaning from the hips like this though, then you've got a couple of problems, yeah? Firstly, because the head's over, the hips are flexed, the main thing here for speed is that because you're in flexion, your hips can't get into extension so well, and that's how your butt fires, yeah, through extension. So if you're always here, you can't get that really nice extension. You're always going to be fighting that battle because you can't get there. So that's really important for speed. And then the other thing is, because you're always here, there's a lot of demand on your lower back. If you speak to someone who runs like this, more often than not they're going to have some sort of lower back pain. Would you say? Lower back? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Dave. I thought you'd agree with me there. But yeah, so the main thing is here, to come from there, just to get that chest up and to run a little taller. So maybe if you've got that and you're running along, just think run tall. Get those hips through, allow the backside to fire, and also alleviate that lower back pain if you have it. Now this is, yeah, a bit of a plug here. This is my client Robert, so we're talking quite small measures here, but this is day one on the left, and as you can see, looking at his ear, his head is, well, on top of, at the front of his foot, and he's got 162, doesn't matter too much, but he's got that hip flexion going on. And this 4 weeks later is him a little bit, not like completely bolt upright, but just that little bit more upright, okay? And his lower back pain did alleviate quite a bit, but the main thing is, on the left, he did 21-minute park run, 5k, and just from that, well, this along with strength and what else not, but then he's doing a 19-minute 5k on the right, just from getting up that little bit more, allowing his glutes to fire, and also running a bit more pain-free. So that's a shameless plug there. Okay. So that's yeah, that's the main thing for the overknee. So we move on. They only use hamstrings. Yeah. So what's happening here? If you look at my feet, oh, they're lifting up now. It will go with loop again in a second. But the problematic areas here is when people don't lift up their feet when they're running, and essentially, I'm waiting for it to go through there, dragging through their legs, okay? So that there's no heel lift, and everything's going through these hip flexors. These hip flexors are dragging. And over time, those hip flexors are going to get pretty exhausted, and also, well, they're just going to get hugely overused. Can we just go through that once more? So rather than dragging those feet and not having much of a heel lift, it's much better to get that heel up a little bit. Yep. And what's going to happen is, from lifting that foot up a bit, hamstrings are going to get activated. Big muscles, we want to use them. And from that hamstring activation, that's going to drive our leg into flexion again, the hip into flexion again. So rather than sort of staying low, this is happening into the next stride. So essentially, these big muscles at the back here are helping out these hip flexors at the front. So you really want to get those heels up and get that lever shortened. Okay, between the hip and the heel. We just go once more, Dave? Yeah. Okay, cool. What I would say, make this proportional, because if you watch like the Galen Rupps, the Mo Farahs, they're kicking their backside every single stride. Now I'm not saying don't do a, you know, if you're doing 10k in an hour and 10, whatever it is, don't be sort of running at your pace but going like that, because you'll get really tired. So make it proportional, get it just up to knee height as a nice start. And then as you get quicker, you can start to pick that heel up a little bit more. Alright, but definitely get those heels up, let the hamstrings help the hip flexors. Okay? And that's just another example, client of mine, on the left, starting off with a bit of a drag, hip flexors are getting extremely tired, and then picking up those heels a bit more on the right, and getting those hamstrings involved. Okay? Forefoot strike. Now, forefoot strike, yes, it's very good for speed, it's very good in, well, it can be very good in general. However, this is the problem that I see the most with people who forefoot strike. I put it in slow motion because if you look at that heel, yeah, the heel's not dropping. And I've got it inside, give it a close up. Now, essentially I'm running on the tiptoes here. Yeah, so what's happening is, whereas that calf muscle, that calf complex is meant to lengthen, shorten, lengthen, shorten, lengthen, shorten, that's what it's meant to do. The whole time my calves here are contracting and they're short. So what happens is, your calf gets overloaded, you end up with calf issues, Achilles issues, because it's just not getting that chance to lengthen, shorten. And quite a good example in the pros of this is, I believe this is the kind of issue that Marc Brown has, because he pretty much, if you watch him, he runs on his tiptoes, and he's had several calf Achilles injuries. So if you do think you're running like that at all, just think about, I'm not talking about slapping that heel down, just kiss the surface, come back up, just let it lengthen and shorten, rather than keeping the heels up and essentially just running, because that gets pretty painful. I did that for 5 minutes and it was pretty painful. Alright, so that's one more floor, and I think that's it. So I'm just, time's a little bit short, so I'm just going to spell a few myths about running technique. Heel striking is always bad. People, I hear that quite a lot, heel striking is bad. Well, yes it is if you're landing out here with a locked out knee and all your force is slamming through your joints. However, if you're pretty much underneath your body, which I keep talking about, but if you've got a nice gentle heel strike close to underneath your body, then underneath the flex knee, where you're absorbing the force, I don't have too much of a problem with that. So heel striking isn't always bad. If you're here, fine, but there's different levels. So just maybe think about where you're actually landing in relation to your centre of mass. Okay? Forefoot running, I've said a little go at. I'm not against forefoot running, but that was an issue with the Achilles and the calves. It's not always good. It is great for speed. However, like I just said, if you're running on tiptoes, then that's not good. And also, you do see forefoot runners who are landing way out there and putting huge demands on their calves. And just because they're landing on their forefoot doesn't mean it's a good technique. Okay, so there's a bit of a, I won't go on too much about that. Drive forwards with your hands. I've heard this quite a few times where we're told to drive with our hands. I do feel that gets a little bit exhausting, so just one tip I give you would be to drive back with the elbows, It makes it a lot easier, and maybe try that on your run this week. Rather than pumping the fists like this, just drive those elbows back a bit more, because it sounds weird, but it'll be a lot easier doing that than it is like that. And it also encourages good posture as well. So maybe try that on your next run. And then finally, flex and extend the elbows. So that I hear this a few times, people think that that's the way to do the arm swing. We want to keep this elbow pretty relaxed, 90 degrees fixed, and let the shoulder do the flexion extension, So just get that motion into your technique rather than, okay? So I'm going to finish on, I say it's good form, it's pretty good. There's still things I can work on. But there's a few traits in here that I think are pretty good. Cadence is reasonably high, I think it's about 180, 186 there. Landing close to underneath the centre of mass. Getting that heel flick at the back, to activate the hamstrings. Landing midfoot-ish. Not going to worry too much about that because my main thing is I'm landing underneath with my high cadence. Could do a little bit on the lean, but the elbow drive backwards, elbow fix at around 90. So I can send these all to you, no problem. And that's just a sort of reasonable example of some good running traits. Okay? So as I say, time is a bit short, so I'm going to pass you over now to Alice, who I think is going to talk a bit about injury prevention and specifically runner's knee.